Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Glenn Parkinson, and I'm President-elect of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and I'm also a proud alum of HBS, so I'm more than delighted that both clubs have come together to celebrate such an iconic leader in the food industry tonight. So pleased that everybody made the trip and we're up for a really nice discussion. But first, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Huron, Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Our meeting place remains the home of over 70,000 diverse Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. And Indigenous peoples are the original caretakers of Turtle Island, and we're grateful for the opportunity to gather here. You know, as I was thinking about tonight, my thoughts turned, as you might expect, to Robert Louis Stevenson. I mean, he was a busy guy. He was well known for Treasure Island, well known for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but maybe less famous for his pronouncements on agriculture and food production. And he said one thing that I thought was really appropriate to tonight. He said, "Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant." And I think that really captures the long-term vision and leadership of our guest this evening. But before we get started, I'd like to recognize our sponsors. First off, the Boston Consulting Group for helping us make this evening possible, from which I'm also an alumni, and I think that's the last one I'll mention. And our season sponsor, the Canadian Bankers Association. Also, this season, the Canadian Club of Toronto has partnered with Canada's Forest Trust, and that's an ESG company planting on behalf of their partners to reduce carbon impact, and as a result, the carbon impact of our entire season this year has been dramatically reduced. So please look up Canada's Forest Trust online if you would like to know more. It's a wonderful organization. And last, I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't just tell you about 3 quick events that we have coming up in June before we wrap up our season for the year. So June 6th, we have Ambassador from the U.S. to Canada, David Cohen, joining us. On June 7th, in the evening, we'll hold our annual Pride celebration, which is always loads of fun. And this year, we'll include a performance from not just any drag queen, but one of the city's preeminent drag queens, Tynomi Banks. And Thursday the 8th, we've got a discussion on the future of energy in Canada and how Indigenous communities will help lead the way. So please visit CanadianClub.org, learn a little bit more about membership, and get your tickets for the next events. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce our honored guest. Michael H. McCain is Executive Chair of the Board of Maple Leaf Foods, a $4.5 billion organization with cherished brands and over 14,000 employees across Canada and the United States. Mr. McCain began his career in McCain Foods in the late 1970s and held a variety of leadership roles there, including President and Chief Executive Officer of McCain USA. But he joined Maple Leaf Foods in 1995, and here's where the platform for significant transformation in food industry leadership that we're going to talk about tonight comes from. And his dedication to building an organization of strong, sustainable, value-based principles. I mean, Maple Leaf is committed to being the global leader in sustainable proteins, and you really see this reflected in the commitments made publicly around advancement of nutrition, reducing antibiotic use in animals, commitment to humane animal care, and environmental sustainability, and food security both here in Canada and internationally. Mr. McCain is a director of McCain Capital and Maple Leaf Foods. He's a member of the Richard Ivey Business School Advisory Board, the Business Council of Canada, and the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health Foundation. He's also the honorary chairman of Maple Leaf Centre for Food Security. Moderating this evening is Ann Hui, the Globe and Mail's former national food reporter, who now covers demographics in Canada and does it from a lens of using food to explore public policy, health, the environment, and agriculture. She's also the author of the bestseller Chop Suey Nation, the Legion Cafe, and other stories from Canadian Chinese restaurants, which won the 2028 Edna Stabler Award for Creative Nonfiction. So I'm pleased to pass the Canadian Club podium over to you. Welcome.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Good, Ann.
Ann
Ann and I first met when she was on the food beat at the Globe.
It's right. That's right. You are, and have always been, I think, to me, a bit of an enigma. I think that many people would consider the following statements oxymorons. So a billionaire, one of the country's wealthiest individuals, who is also a vocal critic of the inequities and social injustice that is the product of capitalism. An individual who has spent decades at the helm, at the helm of a protein company, most notably a meat company, who's also a ardent environmentalist, someone who's deeply, deeply committed to sustainability.
Yeah.
So what?
A little disjointed, isn't it?
I mean, do you think that these things are oxymorons?
No, I don't actually. I think there's some symmetry in that, in the sense that, and maybe this is self-justification, but it works in my head anyway. I think that people, there are successful people in the world that, whether it's in a family or an individual, and I think without denying their success, they have the prospects of giving back to society. And I think that's more than a responsibility. I think it's an obligation, but I don't think that belies the fact that they were successful in the first instance. That's how I look at it. Not everybody would agree with that, but that's how I see it. With respect to the role that we play in sustainability in our industry, clearly our industry is a key protagonist in the climate calculus, along with other elements of sustainability. And we had a kind of that existential question that we had to address, which was whether or not we were going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. And we chose not to be part of the problem. We are part of the problem. We're a big part of the problem as an industry. But we chose the path of trying to lead an industry to solutions, and we think they exist. And it just takes, it doesn't take many, it takes a few that believe that to realize change, and so that's what we're doing. So it does feel like an enigma, but I'm pretty comfortable with it.
I want to dig in some more into your belief system, for sure, but I have to start with the unique timing of this event, because pretty significant life change for you.
I'm out of a job.
Right. I've been told to avoid the R word. Right.
Don't want to talk about that.
You're certainly not.
Redeployed.
Right. Redeployed.
Yeah.
So earlier this month, you stepped down from your role as CEO, which you had been in for 25 years. Right. You are now executive.
A little over that.
Okay. Executive chairman of the board.
I am now.
So
that's what they say.
What does this all look like? What does your life look like these days?
Well, redeployed means retirement. Retirement kind of sucks, so I don't want to do that. So redeployed is I've said to all of my family and teammates that if biology gave me the choice, aka if I was 35 and could do it all over again, I would, but I can't. Biology doesn't give us that choice, so you kind of hit a certain place in where you've got a runway and you want to do some things, and you have some other things and things you want to get done in your final stretch, and you need to rebalance or redeploy in order to be able to accomplish that. And so that's what I'm trying to do. So dialed back the Maple Leaf component. Good for them because they get a better leader than myself with fresh eyes. Dialed up some other business interests in the family. Our work in philanthropy, strategic philanthropy, mental health, food security, a few environmental things that we're working on. And then finally, I've got some interest in public policy and maybe be able to kind of dig into that in some way over time. So we'll we'll try and figure that out. Not going to rush.
Looking back at your time as CEO with Maple Leaf, what do you think your legacy has been, and what do you want your legacy to be?
When you hit my age and stage, and when you're in that kind of inflection point of change, it does make you very reflective. So I've had a lot of time to think about that question, because I wanted to answer it for myself, actually. And you look at it in the context of what you're most proud of over your time. And when I started at Maple Leaf Foods, my absolute obsession at the time was that I was going to commit myself to basically culture and leadership. The culture, the people, and the environment that they work in. And I get great satisfaction over spending time with extraordinarily talented people. I get motivated by people, surrounding myself by people that are more talented and capable than I, and I find that very motivational. And over a 25-year period, I think we built a culture of Maple Leaf that allowed us to do bold things like become the first carbon neutral food company in the world, amongst other things. It was a culture that kind of bred bold things in what we did. And it's largely driven by the people that our culture and the organization was able to attract. If there's anything I'm most proud of, it's the people in the organization and the culture that we created over that period of time, and I'm pretty proud of that, actually.
Is there a specific moment that you can remember, or incident that you can bring up when we're talking about your most proud moments? Something that you're...
Yeah, well, I think over the period of time, probably the accomplishment that I think we collectively created. It was a lot of energy went into it. It was part of the kind of the transition that we made in 2015 as an organization, as we were going through a pivotal time in the journey of the organization, when we made the commitment to leadership and sustainability. In 2019, we became the first in the world, and small Canadian company, and we're larger in food in Canada, but that's like being the tallest of the seven dwarfs in the global food industry, and so we're pretty small. But for us to be the first in the world large-scale food company to become carbon neutral now, not some point in the future, was a very proud moment for all of us, actually, inside the organization, and we were. I still look back at that as a moment that that defines us over that period of time.
What has been the most challenging moment? Is there any one kind of regretful moment when? Yeah,
probably we had a terrible tragedy in food safety in 2008. We're in the food business. The food business is an extraordinary industry. We represent sustenance and the soul of humanity and nutrition and all things good in family life and all of the goodness that we feel very emotionally in our business. And then all of a sudden 23 people die on our watch. And we're accountable for that. And it's very, first and foremost tragic for the victims, but also for the rest of the organization was a kind of one of those moments, and so I'd say that would be the worst.
Mm-hmm. You last year penned an op-ed in the Financial Post. Mm-hmm. It was called A New Charter for Capitalism. Mm-hmm. And you wrote, among other things...
An odd platform for that to be published, isn't it? Hmm?
Yeah. You wrote about, while capitalism has led to many good outcomes, you talk about also the terrible, inexcusable consequences, and you say the trade-offs are too great. Mm-hmm. One of the themes that comes up in that op-ed over and over again is your criticism of what you describe as short-termism, mm-hmm. short-term thinking, mm-hmm. Across kind of all parts of our life. Yep. So I want to get you to maybe expand on that, the idea of short-termism, as it relates specifically to certain subjects when it comes to food. So sustainability. Mm-hmm. how do you apply that, and what is your biggest kind of concern when it comes to short-term thinking and
Yeah, it's, I think it's super important, I think, to all corners of our society. I think it's reflected in the capital markets. I think it's reflected in corporate and business leadership. I think it's reflected in politics. I think it's even reflected in kind of personal behaviors in Main Street Canada and the United States. So it's just I don't know, the psychology or the effect of impact now versus what impact in the future, and trying to weigh that is just incredibly difficult. That particular thought was targeted more towards the role of short-termism in the business community, although I do feel that in politics, most people would think that the politics of short-termism comes into play, when they're focused on the next election period, and not what's good for communities in the long term. In a business context, in the capital markets, I just think there's a lot of systemic issues that drive short-term behavior, and that prohibits things like taking leadership positions on sustainability, like taking important kind of societal positions, all the way through to the business decisions that we make. I mean, we because we have a kind of an owner-operator perspective, even though we're a public company, we have an owner-operator shareholder that is focused on the long term. But we'll make investments with 6, 7, 8 years of return, which is not unreasonable. I mean, that's pretty common, I think, in let's say the business community. But it's very challenging to get the capital markets to kind of embrace that. The number of shareholders that I talk to regularly, it's like, I think my favorite statistic was the Economist quoted the average Fortune 500 company in America is held by an institutional shareholder for 278 days, right? 278 days. That's the average, right? And you visit with shareholders, most of which are measured on alpha for the next year. Right? Most of them are measured on alpha. That's their reward system as a shareholder, and they commonly and easily express that their interest is the next quarter, right? The next few quarters might be, they might connect the dots to 1 or 2 years down the road, but that's it. And we make long-term investments, and every time we go tell our shareholders that we're making a long-term investment. They sell the stock and say, "I'll be back to you a couple of years before it operationalizes." So I feel like there's a lot of impediments in the capital markets to short-term, that created by short-term behaviors that are just not good for society. Sustainability is probably one of the better ones. One of the better ones. I would say it's not just in corporate behavior. Again, I referred to political behavior, but even consumers, actually. I think I was in Ottawa recently, and one of the suggestions that I made to them was helping the business community do a better job of communicating to Canadian society the importance of sustainability. Because today, I mean, the reality is that most consumers are not motivated by it. They either don't understand it or they're not motivated by it. When we became the first carbon neutral food company in the world, and we decided we're going to hawk the shit out of it by putting a little carbon zero brand on our products, our marketing people, our brand people race into my office and say, "Houston, we have a problem here. What's the problem? We've just done a mountain of research, and it demonstrates that consumers don't care. They don't care. They're not motivated by this." And we've done that. We've repeated that over and over and over. Yeah, I mean, a few do, and it's probably growing, but at a very slow pace. But they don't care as much as they should, right? Because their interest, for obvious reasons, for reasons I think we also have to be empathetic to, like the other end of that spectrum, which is food security, right? And I'm sure you're going to want to talk about that. But the reasons that we need to be empathetic to, but they're not motivated by the future. You've got a 3-year-old daughter, Ann. I'm sure you care a lot about what life's going to be like for her when she's 50 and 60 years old, and at the end of the day, it's I think if their behaviors reflected a long-term impact, that might make it easier for the rest of us as well. But
So what did you tell those business leaders in Ottawa about how you do that? How do you make people care?
I didn't, actually. I didn't. It's just, I was more focused on trying to get people aligned around the goal,
Okay.
as opposed to the how-to.
Okay. Well, what would you tell them?
I don't know. I'd have to put my creative best in for messaging, and I'd have to give that some thought. You know, I mean, messaging long-term implications, particularly when you're dealing with a situation like 7 million Canadians, and you know, like 1 in 4 Canadians are food insecure today. Messaging that you shouldn't care about that. You should think about, you know, the impact on the environment in you know, 30 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
Is a tough challenge, and so I think there's a lot smarter communication minds than my own that could come to an answer to that. I do think that we should do a better job of getting people to understand, yeah, just getting people to understand the implications, and that would, you know, if the Canadian population, mainstream Canada, understood the impact of climate, what it meant for them, for their children, their grandchildren, then they might have greater influence on these matters with politicians, who might therefore then have greater, impact on the business community. But so long on diagnosis and short on solutions, maybe.
How about the food security challenge? Because you've kind of danced around it a little bit. You know, you cited the most recent figures. I think 2021, we're seeing something like 16% of Canadians are 19% are facing some level of food insecurity, not having access to nutritious food based on income. And globally, you know, the food insecurity issue is, you know, even more pronounced. We have tens of millions of people around the world who are facing severe or acute food insecurity. First of all, what do you even say to that? But also, you know, to draw that connection again with short-termism.
Yeah.
You know, what is the connection there between short-term thinking and the food insecurity challenge that we find ourselves in, crisis that we find ourselves in?
Well, the food security challenge has been with us for some time. I'm super proud of the work that Maple Leaf has done in trying to galvanize a community of collaborators, because Maple Leaf can't solve this. I think we embarked on this journey recognizing that collaboration was the centerpiece of success, and we had to collaborate with government, with civil society, with industry, and try and tackle a problem that we felt that we could add some value in that collaboration to, which I think we have. Incredibly proud of the work that we've done. I think we've moved the needle of in terms of the work extraordinarily well. Very super proud of my team that have led that initiative, and we've had and a lot of other outside people involved in that. We've got a great board at the center. Evan Fraser, he's in the audit. There he is, right over there. He's on the board. Mustafa, I think somewhere around here. There he is. He was on the board. I think we did some good things together, actually, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done to date. And I'm so proud of that, and yet the damn number's gone backwards. That's the problem, right? We're looking at saying, geez, we're doing all these good things and it's getting worse. And so that's a real struggle when you look at it and say, well, like I think in the latest survey, 2021, and I believe it's worse now, right? That was 2021 data. I think it's worse now. 6.8 million Canadians, defined as food insecure. I think the number, Evan will probably correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the number is around 4.8 of moderately and severe, something of that in that zone, in that zip code. That's like 1 in 4 children, food insecure. One in 4 children, and it's challenging. The issue is that it's not an easy challenge. Start with the why, the big why. Clearly, poverty, the role that poverty plays in that calculus is acute. And the Canadian government has done some good things, I think, to improve poverty in this country, not the least of which in the child tax credit, I think had a major impact on poverty levels in this country. And certainly showed some positive signs. But But it's a mistake to conclude that it's only about poverty. It's not only about poverty. There's issues of access. There's issues of racial inequality, because the prevalence in the Black community, the Indigenous community, is like in the 30s, 33 to 40% ish, kind of versus in the high teens and the rest of in the average population. There's issues of literacy, financial literacy, nutritional literacy. There's issues of mental health. There's issues of 50% of the people food insecure have a disability, 50%. So these are very complex societal issues. Our goal is to collaborate towards a better outcome, but I can tell you that one organization, the government by itself, one organization by itself, civil society by itself, is not going to solve this. It's genuinely has to be a collaboration, and that's how we've tried to approach it, even though it's getting worse. I think one of the catalysts for it getting worse is obviously food inflation has played a role in that, and food pricing. So it's a challenging problem, but we've made progress in what we're doing. It's just not had the impact that we need yet.
You talked about getting more involved with policy, wanting to have maybe a little bit more influence in policy making. Is public office something that you would ever consider? No,
definitely
that
not.
was decisive.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
Not
too many skeletons in the closet. I got a thick skin, thin skin. Too many skeletons in the closet. No.
Okay.
No,
all
not.
right.
Don't like to be criticized.
You touched on this. None of us do.
No.
You touched on this just now, but you're sometimes referred to as an activist CEO, right? You can go in and speak to Bay Street crowds, and there's a lot of that represented here. But we also have people from the academic world. We have you go and speak with nonprofit organizations all the time, and you obviously have the Food Security Institute as well. So you're talking to kind of different rooms and different players. And I'm curious to hear about your experience sort of speaking to different rooms, bringing those groups together, but maybe most importantly, what do you wish those groups knew about one another? What do you wish that they better understood?
I think one of the things we've discovered in our food security journey is the incredible power of dialogue. Just the incredible power of dialogue. I would tell you the story of my first journey in this. I happen to have I'm blessed with a woman on my team who I've worked with for over 20 years, who I would consider the soul of Maple Leaf. She's extraordinary, and she was foundational in our move into the food security movement. And we were looking for a way to participate in society where we could give back. She led us in that particular direction. Her first introduction, and Evan Mustafa, you'd get a kick out of this, I'm sure. Her first introduction was with Nick Saul. Now, Nick, some of you may know Nick. Nick is an extraordinary. Do you know Nick?
I know Nick. Yeah.
Okay, so Nick has got When Nick first came to see me in my office, he left. He was feeling a little bit like, oh man, I'm going into Darth Vader's den. You know what I mean? I'm going into Darth Vader's den. That's how it felt to him. And he actually said to me at the time, not to bury the lead, we become very good friends. But in that moment, he said, if my people, by that the food security movement across the country, if they knew that I was in your office, I would be disowned, right? And he had a collection of views about the food industry, large food, the animal protein industry. At the end of the day, we spent a lot of time talking. We just spent a lot of time talking. And one of the things we discovered in that talk is that we probably shared a view on 95% of what we talked about. There's a critical 5% maybe that we differed on. We stayed the hell away from the 5% and just concentrated on the 95 and said, how can we figure out a way to make that 95 better? And, I think I would say that I learned an incredible amount from him about the challenges of food security and, when Nick, shakes his finger at me and says, "You just need to remember, the food security is not about food, right? You're in the food business, it's not about food." So I learned, and my team learned a lot from him, and I think he learned a little bit about us and the food industry, and that that we did have had solid intentions, right? And so all of which is, I think that story illustrates that in these things, the power of dialogue is candid dialogue, and one of the elements that I think in the dialogue that's missing today is just the basic assumption of good intentions. If people have dialogue with with the assumption of good intentions, there's too much now that that is purported to be talk and dialogue, but the assumption of some malfeasance on the other side of that dialogue, and that never ends in a good place, right?
I've been on the receiving end of that same talk from Nick myself.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, wonderful guy. He comes to my place, and we go for 7 o'clock in the morning walks for an hour, and so we walk, and I listen. He talks.
The title of this event that we're at right now is called "The Future of Food." Mm-hmm. So we should probably talk about the future of food.
Future of food.
Yeah. What does that mean to you? What do you think is the future of food?
The food industry, which is the only industry I really know after 45 years of professional engagement in the food industry, is an industry that is a very emotive business, right? Because food industry is food. As I said earlier, is the source of family connection, of sustenance, of nutrition, nourishment. Mm-hmm. Who doesn't, connect some of their best times and memories in their life to a food experience in many cases, right? Yet the food industry, I think today, more than it ever has, is connected in some way to some very significant ills in society. And we're facing those challenges at a time when the global population is going to be 10 billion people before we turn around, and the resources on, one defined planet are not really capable of supporting, as we know it today, nutritional diets for 10 billion people. And the challenge in food strategy and global food strategy is trying to find the sweet spot of a balance between the forces of availability, affordability, sustainability, nutrition, and the care for animals, which is a key component of this as well. And most of those factors conflict with one another. There's a conflicting element. And depending on which perch you look at the future of food from, you'll be very judgmental about one perch to the exclusion of the others. And that becomes very problematic in finding the balance that's required in a food strategy going forward. The food industry, notwithstanding all the goodness that the industry brings, economically and otherwise, is a key protagonist in the sustainability question, right? It's 25-35% of all the greenhouse gas emissions are generated in agri-food, and the leading protagonist behind that is animal nutrition or animal protein. And as I said earlier, being part of the solution rather than part of the problem was critical to our vision, and I think the whole industry needs to align around that. I think there is some good news, going back to the idea of dialogue, some good news on the horizon in that the dialogue that exists today is really powerful, I think, really, really powerful, game-changingly powerful. For example, born out of a session that Goldie had around sustainability, Dave Mackay, myself, and Galen Weston have launched an organization. We've actually just corralled Ken from Nutrien in the same initiative that has formulated a blueprint. BCG actually were very helpful in that. Thank you, Cliff. Cliff sponsored all that pro bono work as well, so that was good. around the Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agriculture, with a view not to how can we do one good thing and pretty it up to sell it as being good folks,
Right.
but how do we look at the problem of net zero agriculture holistically and say what's the end game is net zero agriculture? What are the building blocks to actually achieve that, right? Kind of beginning with the end in mind. And there's been some great work. We have kind of articulated a blueprint of, I think, 5 or 6 initiatives that have the capacity to reduce the emissions in the Canadian agri-food chain by upwards of 70%, so over 70%. We're focused on 2 technologies that are game changers today, regenerative agriculture and anaerobic digestion. Those are the 2, I think, the early leads in that. And while sustainability is critical to the future of food in this calculus of those pillars, I think the fact that we're talking about it, and we've got a view as to how we can start on that journey of change to affect all of the agri-food business in Canada. That dialogue never would have happened 10 years ago. That's one of the key sources of hope, in my view, is the fact 10 years ago that dialogue wouldn't have happened. Today, that's all that people are talking about. And just the fact that we're having that dialogue is super important. Evan's involved in that one too. I was looking over here at Evan. He's deeply involved in it. And pardon me? Yeah.
No pressure.
No pressure, no. The same thing's true in availability and food security. I do feel, notwithstanding the fact that the numbers are going backwards, I do think that we're in a better space today in that collaboration between government, industry, and civil society. I think we're in a better place to find solutions in time than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think we're in a better place, notwithstanding those numbers. I think we've got a better understanding of the diagnosis and potentially some of the things that we can do about it. We're advocating some simple things that can make a difference in Ottawa, for example. Canada is the only G7 country, the only one that doesn't have a school food program. The only one. That's not good. We've been super advocates of the Canadian Disabilities Act, which is not yet passed, but or specifically defined, because 50% of those food secure have a disability. That'll be super helpful. We've even, the last time we were there, which was actually groundbreaking. Goldie, all those things that you do with government, you'd recognize this. It was myself, Nick Saul from the Community Food Centres of Canada, and Kirsten Beardsley from Food Centres Canada. The 3 of us were lobbying together for a whole day, visiting anybody that would listen. And just the fact that there was the 3 of us together advocating for the same thing was super impactful, really, really impactful in Ottawa. Right? People listened a little more carefully because of that. But we actually had one specific message, which was the government of Canada should adopt a goal. People adopt a goal. We've adopted at the centre a 50% reduction by 2030 in food insecurity in Canada. Government of Canada should do the same thing, and it's important to be goal-driven. So we're making progress. I think we've made some good progress on the nutritional pillar. Certainly, our focus of effort has been on raising animals without antibiotics, of which we're one of the largest in the world in raising animals without antibiotics. Antibiotic resistance is one of the threats to humanity, and so I think becoming very good at that in our meat supply. 85% of all the antibiotics dispensed in North America go to an animal. Right? So that's why it's super important in antibiotic resistance. Certainly on animal care, we've I think been leaders in the world in that as well. So these are big challenges. Finding the right balance, I think, Ann. In finding the balance. One of the challenges, I think, or one of the obstacles to moving that forward is many of these issues require some kind of global leadership. Local leadership is not going to suffice. That you try and lead on some of these things locally, and it goes from good work into martyrdom really quickly, really quickly. And that's so. The challenge is there's no global governance, global leadership, no global platform that's really grasped the challenges of global food strategy, right? Yet, maybe someday, but not yet.
Do we have questions? Do we have time for questions, Colleen? Yeah.
Anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Mr. McCain, he's kindly just wide open. Okay.
Thank you for the information. I have a question. I don't know if you would be able to comment on it, but with the rise of number of individuals that are now vegan or vegetarian and the increased demand for that in the food industry, how does that impact the future of food? Is that an opportunity, a threat? With the limitation of resources. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure. So we've made a large investment in plant-based protein. Didn't work out that well. There was a significant degree of expectation and buzz and imagination of the future of plant-based protein, specifically 3 years ago. And we believed in that, actually. We believed in it, and we invested really heavily behind that. For reasons we now understand, it did not materialize. The number of vegans and vegetarians are not growing materially in North America or around the world. Animal protein is here to stay, and might plant-based proteins grow to a higher level than they are today? Yeah, we are confident that they will, but they will not be dominant in the protein consumption of humanity in any of our lifetime. And therefore, that is why we, as an organization, have committed to fixing the animal protein business rather than trying to replace it with a plant-based protein. That's never going to happen. So we're not going to dream about that. We're going to focus on fixing the ills and the problems of the industry that will likely be around for the next 100 years. The issues that the plant-based protein category faced, I think we did a body of research that spanned something like 7,000 consumers, mostly in the U.S. And the problem with that plant-based, first of all, there's a pretty deep 150,000-year-old attachment to animal proteins. Number one. Number two, it didn't meet taste experience needs, so it didn't taste as good, and it kind of demonstrates yet again that consumers will not sacrifice taste. There's been significant questioning of the actual nutritional benefits of it. The value proposition didn't exist, and it didn't have a popularity amongst all the family, which is important in most family contexts. So by the way, they don't give a shit about the sustainability calculus. Don't care. Right? It was, of all the motivators to purchase, it was in 2019, it was the fifth, a distant fifth, and in 2022, it had lost ground. Okay, so as a motivator. So, that business, it was disrupted by two very prominent organizations. Their business went way up, and now it's gone way down. And so they're sort of fighting for their life.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic so far, great insights. René van Acker, University of Guelph. Given that you said that consumers don't care about net zero, maybe.
That's a generalization, by the way, because many do. Many do. It's just not. It's not mainstream.
But maybe not in their
Canada don't.
purchases currently. And that the biggest spend in Canada in terms of farmer support is on business risk management programs, which really support the status quo more or less. How do we move the needle on greater adoption of regenerative agricultural practices inside the farm gate?
So this would resonate with Evan, because we had this conversation, a deep conversation, asking that very question about a week ago, Evan?
Friday, I think.
Yeah, Friday. It was Friday. There was a group of us that were gathered for a couple of hours to talk about that question. I don't believe that we can move the needle until we have more insight on the end state and the how-to. Right? You need to have an executable plan before you can execute the plan. So, for example, the biggest gating issue at Regen Ag today is the MRV. You know what that is. The others probably don't. It's the measurement, something. What is? Verification. Reporting. There you go. Thank you, Evan. So, the MRV system, right? It is not in a good place today. It's too costly. It's too cumbersome. It's not accurate. It's not real time, and you can't execute the strategy for regen agriculture without an efficient and effective MRV system in place. And that's a gating issue. And so, probably we should concentrate our efforts on really getting through that gate well before we try and imagine what the rest of the executional blueprint looks like. That would be my view, and that's, I think, to some degree, I think that's where we landed. Was it not, Evan, last week? The second issue is there's no real alignment yet on the efficacy of the agricultural practice. Regen agriculture, for those that don't know, by the way, I should probably clarify that. Regen ag is basically dialing back 100 years to agricultural practices of 100 years ago, kind of walking away from the industrial agricultural practice that has led to a significant release of carbon that was 100 years ago in the soil, now is in the atmosphere. And capturing Mother Nature's ability to actually recapture that through what we learned from the science guy, photosynthesis, in recapturing that carbon from the atmosphere back into the soil. And there are 5 core agricultural practices that contribute to that. When you look at the efficacy of those 5 practices, or variations of the theme, I know there's regional implications, there's crop implications, but when you look at them, there's no real alignment yet on whether or not the practice costs more, the same, or less. And I've talked to as many people that would tell you more as the same as less. And answering that question is really critical to how you execute your plan going forward. Very different strategies depending on how you answer that question. So, short answer is moving the needle. I think there's a lot more homework that needs to be done first as gating issues before we figure out what our executable plan. You can do a lot of very symbolic pilot projects to say, well, let's just show that we're doing good things, and the farmers will spend, $300 an acre or more, for nothing, right? Just to show that we're doing good things. And it's got to be more substantive than that. Does that resonate or no? Yeah. Well.
One last question. You guys going to fight it out, or it's up?
Thanks very much for a great talk. I just want to ask, how would you, obviously cost of production is a big factor and in the inflation. I'm just wondering how your company in the future will be able to bring down the cost of production. Will artificial intelligence, will robotics, will that help your company bring down costs for people? Because food insecurity may be a problem in 25% in this country, but globally in Africa and many parts of Asia, that's even a much bigger problem.
Yeah. We think, I don't love the misery loves company narrative, but food inflation in Canada was between 9 and 11% last year. In Europe, it was 17, 18. So, the percentage of GDP that goes, of income that goes into food in Canada is actually one of the lower in the countries in the world, actually, when you compare to some of these other countries. And so the impact of that inflation is significantly higher in other parts of the world than it is even in Canada, and we know how bad it is here. How do you bring down cost? I mean, you know, cost reduction, we'd actually put a different moniker on it. We just try and describe it as waste reduction, right? Shows up in a lot of different avenues. It's a cornerstone of the food industry, always has been. Comes through technology, capital investment, the elimination of waste in the supply chain. Things like, for example, you know, 30% of all food produced today in North America doesn't hit the human stomach. 30%, right? It's astonishing, really. 30% of the food produced in North America does not hit the human stomach. So that's an element of waste in that improves the food cost, I think, but also the availability. Cost reduction, because food is already a thin margin business, so it's pennies in a dollar is the margin of it. It's always been known to be a thin margin business. But cost reduction in food, which is not to the holy grail to the food inflation issue or the food security issue, because it comes in inches, right? It's little inches, you know, one at a time. We set goals for cost reduction every year, right, to try and balance that off with our inflationary need. We have to, you know, price for as little as we have to, as we responsibly have to or can. But part of that calculus is doing our responsible job of elimination of waste at the same time. We've just invested in a new facility in London, Ontario. It's opening up as we speak. It's 660,000 square feet, $772 million, $850 with the startup costs attached to it. Double the line speeds. The productivity levels are exponentially higher than used to be. We closing 4 very inefficient plants into the one mega facility. It's the largest single-site food investment in Canadian history in London, Ontario, that Maple Leaf's just opening now. I think that's an example of, you know, of investment and waste reduction and technology and all of those other things. So, but it's a game of inches, right? And I don't think that's the solve for the big systemic challenges that Ann and I have been discussing earlier of food security, sustainability, availability, et cetera.
I think Sundus is going to come up and send us all off. But before she does that, I do want to say thank you.
Thank you.
I want everybody here to, I hope you all recognize that, you know, in my job, my day-to-day job, I sit across from a lot of CEOs and people who I ask questions to and who don't necessarily give fulsome and thoughtful answers. And who actually answer the question. And so I really, really appreciate how generous you've been and honest you've been with everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Definitely echo that. Hi, everyone. My name is Sundus Hussain. I'm an officer of the HBS Club of Toronto. I also lead growth for DoorDash. And I really want to thank you on behalf of both the clubs, the HBS Club of Toronto and the Canadian Club of Toronto, for attending this really engaging conversation. Big thank you to Michael for sharing your interesting and valuable insights. A big thank you to Ann for masterfully guiding this discussion. What an engaging convo. My key takeaway from this is how do we surround ourselves with the right people and create the right culture to create the big bets, place the big, bold bets that create the change that we want to make. And with that, I also want to thank, last but not least, the folks behind the scenes who brought this event to life. So the HBS team with our club president, Suzanne, leading from the front, and the fabulous Canadian club team, Colleen, Kathleen, and the rest of the team. Thank you so much. With that, lots of clapping. With that, our back patio is still open. We've got food, drinks, hang out, stick around, and hope you have a great evening. Thank you. Thanks so much.